All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Actual Anarchy podcast. This is our Thanksgiving special with Dr. Walter Block talking about Poverty, Inc., and this can be found at actualanarchy.com/51. But before we get into that, I just want to remind you that you still have time to get in on the Tom Woods Liberty Classroom Black Friday weekend special. He's got the best prices of the year coming up, and you can find more at actualanarchy.com/Liberty Classroom. And if you do sign up through our affiliate link, we will give you access to the Rothbard repository, which is a searchable database, keyword searchable database of Murray Rothbard lectures. And then you can find the timestamps where he talks about hundreds and hundreds of different topics. It's really great for research or for getting into Facebook fights and needing to find a great rebuttal to something such as somebody saying that Uber is a blight on society and the taxi medallions are really the best way to go about allocating resources, things like that. So another bonus we'll throw in, membership to readitfor.me. It's a service that business and leadership and personal development books into 10 or 15-minute digestible summaries. And so the concept there is if you are a very, very busy person, reading a 200, 300, 400-page book can take several hours, 4 or 5 hours, something like that. So the idea here is that you get the main gist of their summaries or their points all in a very convenient package that's something that you can read a summary, you can listen to an audio of it, or I think you also have to maybe pay for this, but there's video versions of that. The membership that we're offering is a light membership, which includes the audio and text summaries from the personal development category of books, and that's normally $89.99 per year. And you'll get that for free if you sign up for Tom Woods Liberty Classroom through our link. The first 5 to get the master level of the Tom Woods Liberty Classroom through our link will also get the readitfor.me annual masterclass membership, which is the world's only masterclass program designed around the world's best business books. And what they do there is they go in a deep dive fashion in 52 of the most popular and influential business books. So you'll see Dale Carnegie's, How to Win Friends and Influence People, a whole bunch of other types of books where you actually get into a summary and a discussion with facilitator-led discussions so that you can get a really deep understanding of these very, very powerful concepts in the most influential books in business and leadership. So that is another extra bonus. That is normally $49 a month. And so that's called the readitfor.me Masterclass. And if you sign up at the master level on the Tom Woods Liberty Classroom, you will get that as a bonus if you're in the first 5 people to sign up on our link. And you can find our link at actualanarchy.com/Liberty Classroom. So, happy holidays, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. How you doing, Robert?
Hi. Yeah, I'm all right. How are you doing? You
doing well.
Came right on and started right it off.
That's right. We can do a retake if you want.
No, that's fine.
So I have a question for you.
Uh-oh.
I found myself vacillating back and forth several times in relation to this film, Poverty, Inc.
Yeah.
When it was first brought up, I had what are the principles in play? When Drake brought it up on our bonus portion of that episode, I think it was Sharknado. And I was like, well, it's free market, it's voluntary, nothing wrong with it. Certainly there may be ill effects, but everyone expects to benefit, and the entrepreneurs or business persons who are displaced by this, they could be displaced by a new technology or new product at any time.
All true. Mm-hmm.
And then I watched the film, and it is compelling, I think. I mean, it plays into a lot of the things that I have held as problems, like the USDA and FDA subsidizing the overproduction of certain commodities in the United States in an effort to further increase the bureaucratic and machine and budgets of that machine. And
well, it is a misallocation of resources, isn't it?
Right, it certainly is, and it's also a result of tax, involuntary contributions supporting that apparatus and thus distorting the market and what the prices would otherwise be.
Right, correct.
So there's a whole bunch of other, issues, and I'm sure we'll get into them with Walter on the episode. But then I read his paper, and I'm like, yeah, he's right. Back to the principles. Yeah, he's right. But he's also confining his argument. He's very careful to confine it to just the ex ante sense, just the voluntary portions of it, though he does make mention of some of the state-directed aid in that how it's funded may be a problem, but the effect of the giving is still in the ex ante sense the same as if it were a charitable thing. And it may have
all people expect to benefit. Well, my issue wasn't with necessarily that, well, I've got plenty of things to say. On the one hand, yes, everybody expects to benefit, and everybody has self-ownership, and if you don't think that you're going to benefit from getting this free stuff, then don't take it. I think the movie does a poor job. Well, I think it conflates harm to some, like disrupting the market volatility to these, as Block would probably call them, bad entrepreneurs, as he calls them in this paper, with harm in general to like an entire group, like the entire country. Clearly, the people that are getting these free goods are benefiting. My question is this the best way to help somebody? Because I think the movie actually functions as an element of the market. It's figuring out another way of doing something. It is. I see it as a form of innovation. Is giving somebody a thing the best way to help somebody? I think it asks a decent question in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, in the economic sense, they are better off in the immediate, or they expect to be better off in the immediate. But there's a lot to be said for building dependency or the welfare trap, also the enabling, right? Like we all are probably familiar with the stories of a family member who's into some bad things, and their parents or their relatives will continue to support them based on stories that, they're going to turn it around, they're using it for good purposes, but then they're out, blowing it on what would be, probably not the best things for them, at least in the observer's opinion, right? Like drugs, alcohol, partying, etc.
Right. Yeah, I analogize it to, there's a whole group of people, millions and millions of people in this world that have all their needs met and don't do anything productive. And those people are children. And it's only when the parents cut them off that they actually start to produce anything. And you can make an argument that, yes, those people are actually developing still and they're not fully formed brains and blah, blah, blah. But the analogy still holds to like what you were just saying, sort of like enabling, like when you're helping somebody do a thing that's contrary to their long-term best interests. But in the short term, they think it's good.
Right, yeah, and this also ties into that basic income guarantee argument where, Block would probably argue, and we can ask him, that the recipients are materially wealthier, but it certainly perverts the incentives.
Exactly.
Because now they're more comfortable in their current position, and the marginal difference between them actually going out and doing something productive is much smaller than it would otherwise be. So the leisure cost is much lower, right? They've lowered the cost of the leisure.
Yes, and people would argue that, yes, my life is better. I have different time preferences. I'm choosing to spend more of my time leisurely. But I don't think the point of the movie was asking, do the people of Africa enjoy a great deal of leisure time? I don't think that was the point of the movie. I think the point of the movie was Africa and Haiti and whatnot are not wealthy, and why is that? They may judge wealth in a different way. Like we have a great deal of wealth in leisure time. Great. But that's the standard. Maybe that's the standard of the West judging Africa and judging people that prefer to have leisure time. But I think that I think the movie did a good job of allowing people to sympathize with the struggles of the entrepreneur and the people that do desire to climb out of poverty. I mean, am I wrong?
Well, I guess if you extend it to, what's to be done about it? Like, I don't know if you read Walter's paper, but he basically says, here's the economic case. A gives something to B. B accepts it.
Right.
Is
Both
is
expect
B
benefit.
yeah is
Right.
is yeah
Is B worse off? Is he harmed? And by definition, no.
right. Now down the road there may be effects, right? Like we were saying, dependency being enabled, et cetera, and by the same token, the other providers of product X that A is now providing B are now faced with this new competitor that may be costless to B, and so it does have have an impact on them, but it's also the entrepreneurial profit and loss system. It's like they are now a buggy whip provider.
Yeah, well, I know the movie spent a lot of time talking to entrepreneurs who are having it rough, and I think Dr. Block does a good job of smacking that fallacy kind of down. But I do think that I have sympathy in my human heart for these people and their struggles, as hard as it is to be an entrepreneur in this world, and then dealing with all the regulations and all the other bullshit. And then here's just one other added thing. I can have sympathy for them. Not to say that that's not, good information and it doesn't create better entrepreneurs. I came up with an analogy, and tell me if you think it's accurate or not. But the movie did a good job of saying, disaster relief is fine and good, but constantly dumping things on people like a trust fund baby is not necessarily the greatest incentive to induce productivity. So when someone trips and falls, you extend a hand to help them back up. You don't give them a pillow and a blanket to make them more comfortable on the ground. Now, maybe, you'd probably take that pillow and the blanket and then you get up anyway. But more and more people with that dependence mentality are going, no, it's actually pretty nice here on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of ties into our other argument that we often bring up, and that is if most of your needs are met, then rather than going out and finding your next meal, you have the ability to complain from your iPhone about what Trump just tweeted, or you can, protest or march or make a knit hat that looks like a female genitalia. So I am a little bit torn. There's also a divide in the appeal of this film. Like, libertarians like it, conservatives like it, Bernie Sanders types like it. Oh, maybe not Bernie Sanders type, but Michael Moore said glowing things about it, but so did Tom Woods. And it was mentioned in the Tom Woods group just the other day that we were going to be doing this movie, and a bunch of people chimed in and were like, oh yeah, that's such a good movie. It's like a red pill. It's very appealing to a lot of people. It has a good message. Maybe there is some negatives to the current model. Mm-hmm. But then you read Walter's paper, and it's like he's saying, well, these people are economically illiterate because it's the Acton Institute, and they're supposed to be free market and laissez-faire and all this. So he holds them to a higher standard than if it were a Michael Moore or a Robert Reich type documentary film, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
But I do find it interesting that there is that divide on this particular movie because Woods is a smart guy. A lot of the people in Tom Woods' group are smart people. And it goes back to
get out of it. I think you can get out of it a bunch of different things, because I tend to think that Walter focused on more the negatives and less of the positives, because I think the movie does do a good job of talking about, and maybe not as much time is spent, like I mentioned yesterday in our bonus content, that a lot of the things that people need are clear titles and property rights and law and that sort of thing, like just law and that sort of thing, as opposed to all this bureaucratic stuff. If you know somebody that knows somebody, and if you got the money to, deal with it. Like at one point, I forget who they were talking to, but was it in like Peru where somebody spent like a certain amount of time to get completely licensed and bonded for this one company, and it was like something like a couple hundred days.
Yeah, it was something like 239 days versus somebody who was more connected could get it done in 40 days.
But either way, I mean, that's a huge difference. But it's also, you're just trying to produce value for people. You're trying to be an entrepreneur on top of doing all this bullshit. And I think Block would agree with us that all this government bureaucracy is nothing but problems.
Right, it should be 0 days.
Yeah, it should be 0 days. It should be you open up a lemonade stand, and the customers will decide whether or not this lemonade is good or not. I mean, I think that's about it. But yeah, I don't think it's a perfect movie. Like I said, I have my quibbles. I mean, entrepreneurs are not guaranteed sales. And Block is right when he says that you dump a bunch of goods on the market, it cheapens those goods, that money that would otherwise be spent on more expensive goods is now free to do other things. Right,
now they can move on to more pressing matters because their problem of eggs or shoes has been alleviated, at least in the
Right.
short term, and potentially in the long term, depending on the model that's used. They make an example in the movie of Tom's shoes going from being a sporadic thing to being more of a continuous thing, and then the reaction from the guy in Africa was like, "Oh no, like this is going to be a problem." And
Well, I think he was more bemoaning the idea that you're so poor that you always need free shoes. Need, as opposed to I'll take them. I think there's a difference between somebody who's perpetually impoverished due to regulations and all that kind of bullshit.
Yeah, though I did find his comment. I found his comment to be almost like by saying this, he's really saying this other thing that he really wasn't saying. It was almost that leftist tactic of, you mentioned all these marginalized groups, but you left out this one, so therefore you're a bad person for leaving this one out.
I'm not sure what you mean. Who's saying this? Is this Block or is this somebody in the movie?
This was the guy who was shown the little Tom Shoes video about, it goes from being a sporadic thing to a consistent thing, like he wants you to have shoes for life, and it's just that comment that you had recalled, that, I don't want us to be dependent on these shoes. Therefore he's saying that he wants us to be poor to always need these shoes. No, he's not saying that.
I don't know if that's what he was saying, that he was saying that the Tom Shoe guy wants people in Africa to be poor all the time so that they need shoes. I think there's a difference in the level of pride is what he was talking about, in that, no, I don't need these free shoes, as opposed to, sure, I'll take some free shoes. Like, I think Dr. Block is like, yeah, I'll take all these gifts. This is great. Dump all this stuff on me. Fantastic.
Right, I'll find a use for him.
But answer me this. If you were to just have this, like if you were a parent and you continually supported your child completely their entire life, would they ever really produce anything? And that's I think the argument that the movie's making.
Yeah, though, isn't that an argument from affect?
It's an argument from me judging somebody else's life.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to stick to just the very thin libertarian principles of is it an aggression or a fraud, the answer would be no.
Correct.
So in the libertarian analysis, that's pretty much as far as you can go. I mean, I guess in the Austrian, you can go into the economic effects and things like that, or things that you can sort of perceive as happening or play out in your in your mind economically. Mm-hmm. So I think, like I'd said earlier, that Block is very careful to silo these things apart in his article, his and Nathan's. And I do agree that there's more to it than what he's narrowly focusing on.
I would say yes, because I think the movie does do a strong argument for, if you really want to help somebody. You can help somebody by giving them a thing. Absolutely. That removes their need for the thing, and it frees them up to do something else instead of getting that thing. But if you want to make somebody more rich, if you want to really empower them, I would say that a better solution would be to trade with them as opposed to just giving them stuff. Not to say that both don't help. I would say both help. But one is, I think, in my estimation, in my judgment, in my on high judgment, declaring what is true for everybody else in the world, I would say that trade is better than charity. But both help.
Yeah, I mean, they're materially better off, though. They, to use the analogy of the fisherman, right? Like being given a fish or learning how to fish. But both can be aid, right? Like learning something, learning a skill, acquiring knowledge via charitable means, and that is also giving. And to Block's point in the paper, he says, well, even if you're giving the guy a fish, he doesn't have to fish that day, so maybe he can make a hat, so now he's a hat richer.
Right. Now, since we're judging this movie, I mean, we are essentially critiquing the movie. Do you think that the movie is more along the lines of what we're saying or more along the lines of what Dr. Block is saying? Like, is it – I might get my thoughts together here before he gets on. Do you think that it was saying that charity is bad, or do you think that it was saying that charity just isn't quite as good as these other things, as trade? Because I think it did a pretty good job arguing for property rights and international trade. But Dr. Block in his article, he says that it shits on international trade.
Well,
at the end, there were those necklace maker ladies who were selling their products in the United States. That's international trade.
Sure, it is. But I guess he's probably picking on that they're not being consistent with the economic principles in play. They were interviewing rando business owners in places. I mean, these are not economists that we're talking to. Sure, but it is also a documentary made by people who claim to be free market economist types. So
true. And you do select, what information to show. It's true.
All right, that works for me. So let's go to the Google description, very short. Poverty, Inc., 2014 historical documentary, 1 hour, 34 minutes, 7.7 on the IMDb, 94% of Google users like it. And it says, very briefly, filmmaker Michael Matheson Miller investigates the complex global industry of foreign aid. And scene.
All right. Not much to talk about there.
Yeah, that's if anything, it has poverty in the amount of information provided in the Google description.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not a lot to pick on there. But this is our Thanksgiving episode, and I felt that it's sort of a that time of year where people are thinking about the less fortunate. And Walter Block had done an article about this particular movie. It had been recommended by our buddy Drake, who was a guest and a benefactor of ours several times. And so it made sense to kind of make this be a special.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad we did it. I think this is an interesting movie. I think it should be seen and discussed and debated between all kinds of people. I think everybody should see it, whether they believe it entirely or not. I think it was well made in general, and maybe, Dr. Block will point out, the candlemaker fallacy and the broken window fallacy, and I think he's right to do those things. So maybe those can get a little more visibility. But then I also think that this is a good movie to show, your average care-hard socialist type that just wants to give people free shit. And of course it helps. I'm not saying it doesn't help. But I think it's a good question to ask. Has there ever been a country that's ever become wealthy from free stuff, just to help? Or anybody in general, even a person. There's a difference between getting somebody back up on their feet and nursing them along like they're a baby their entire life. Now, we can get into the economic aspects of it, and we already have, that, when there's a voluntary trade happening or even any kind of voluntary activity, both parties or all parties are expecting to gain. And then maybe down the road, you're like, you wake up 20 years later, you're like, oh, my God, I've been a man-child for the past, 40 years. Not speaking from experience at all.
Got it. Yeah. And that's something that I am challenged with as a parent as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're already doing things with our girls to help them learn the value of doing work towards a goal and earning money, I mean, it's fiat currency, of course, but the principles are, you have to work towards something, save up capital, learn how to exhibit your time preference in a way that's helping you achieve your goals versus not, being short-sighted versus a longer horizon,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I do think that the movie was interesting, and I do think you're right that people should view it, and it's in stark contrast to the other documentary that we recently watched, The Inequality for All, and that's episode 49, so just 2 episodes back now, and that thing was, as expected, a turd burger.
It was a flaming dumpster fire that just reeking and stenching and belching all kinds of idiotic crap. Now, I don't know, maybe Dr. Block would say that this movie is even worse because it should be better, but I don't think so. I think there's nuggets to be gleaned out of this.
Yeah, you're almost you're making a good point here, because in his article he picks on the movie for holding it to a higher standard, but that's also to say that he's almost denouncing the entire thing, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, when much of it is not objectionable. It's almost as if I were to say, Murray Rothbard and I disagree on 1 or 2 things, therefore Murray Rothbard's no good. Yeah, I think you'd be, like you said, throwing the baby out the bathwater there. I think there's plenty to be gotten here, even if you don't agree with it all. I wish he had spent more time on the private property rights and that sort of thing than maybe interviewing, a bunch of displaced entrepreneurs. But like I said, I have sympathy for these entrepreneurs. It's hard enough out there for a pimp and for, having to deal with all that shit. Now, there's one point in the paper that kind of stuck out to me, the point of the chickens and the church. Right.
Now, in Dr. Block's article, he goes, well, then the intelligent entrepreneur would just lay back and bide his time and wait for these free eggs to pass and then make a killing once the prices go back up. I hate to say the word privilege because I hate it, but there may be some economic factors that he may not be considering in this equation. I don't know. Maybe this poor chicken farmer may not have any food to feed his chickens with in the meantime, while he's laying back and biding his time for this entire year. I mean, maybe if he had some savings and some land to get a loan off of, but I don't necessarily know that that's the case with all the land issues and the title issues. So I just have sympathy for the guy.
Yeah, and it did say that he sold his chickens, and so ostensibly they went to someone else who could have used them for other productive means. So it doesn't mean necessarily that overall that region experienced a net loss in any respect. I mean, they still did gain a whole bunch of eggs for free from the charity. This particular person was impacted, but that goes back to the entrepreneurial profit and loss system. You know, there's risk involved. And who knows what happened to those hens when he sold them. I mean, maybe they went to individual families who now can raise their own chickens and have their own eggs, and they're better off. So to take just a snapshot is clearly not able to see the entire spectrum. You know, there's a whole web of interactions. It's harder than even predicting the weather, I would think.
Yeah, there are certainly millions and millions and billions of parts and pieces in play at any given time, moving parts, so to speak.
But
and
I do
like
agree.
Said,
I do have sympathy for the guy.
Yeah, I have sympathy for the guy. It's true. And you can only interview so many people in a documentary. But to conflate harm for this one guy to meaning harm to everybody is, I think, a fallacy for sure. And I think the movie is guilty of that. They do interview, a certain number of people, and they say all this harm is being done, and therefore. But they also showed a video of people, grabbing rice off trucks and looking pretty happy about it, and grabbing shoes and digging through, cheap American used clothing and being perfectly happy about it.
Right, yeah.
So,
like the one guy said in Haiti, like, rice used to be a luxury item that we'd have a few times a week. And now it's so plentiful that we have it coming out our ears, and we have it 3 meals a day. Well,
yeah, that sounds like a good thing.
Sounds great, man. Maybe you weren't having 3 meals a day before. I don't know. But it also, they set up the whole film, at least the opening scene with Haiti, with a bunch of interventions that had happened even prior to the earthquake that they allege made the earthquake even worse than it would otherwise have been. And it's all these do-gooders with government trying to do this trifecta kind of plan of marshaling the people from the outlying areas into the cities to work in factories to benefit the manufacturers so they can build sweatshops, which I'm fine with. If someone wants to invest capital and provide opportunity for people to make cheaper goods, they have a voluntary decision to make there if it's going to be a better option for them than something else. And you and I and others benefit from cheaper goods, et cetera, et cetera. But it's when it comes to this social engineering and this sort of model that, as they presented in the film, I think it's probably pretty accurate, at least based on some anecdotal discussions with your sister, like we talked about yesterday for episode 50 with the professional asshole on some of the bonus content, where she knew people in the UN and they were in third world countries living very, very well, air conditioning, servants,
lavish lifestyles,
tax-free income, and a portion of that expenditure would eventually make its way out to the people, quote unquote, in need. So I think that there is a lot of fat in that area, especially when you're involving state and international organizations that receive their funds through involuntary means. So I think that's right to denounce that for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with all the anti-government stuff that was presented in the film. I thought was fair. Do you want to get into the NGOs? Because I don't really have a whole lot to say about that. I wondered if you had any thoughts about the NGOs, as if these are completely benevolent organizations. I assume they are for the most part, but maybe they're just not the best at what they do. I don't know, because they're not operating under the profit motive. They're not having to compete with each other, and therefore they're not coming up with the best solutions to problems. I don't know.
They do have to compete for contributions, right, from donations and whatnot. Though I do think
that's true. Okay.
There's probably some distortion in how NGOs function because of the state involvement, right? So the state sort of builds this superstructure that then the NGOs and the other players in this mechanism that's depicted in the film kind of glom onto. And one of their contentions was that all these people are working within the existing framework that is a bit of a failed framework. And they likened it to the model being based on the Marshall Plan, which the movie seems to purport was actually beneficial to Europe, where I think there's a whole bunch of evidence that it was not beneficial, and it was only after it ended that people were finally able to, through free market processes, begin to recover from that. Because that money had to come from somewhere, right? Came from taxpayers in the United States who were already suffering the effects of financing the war effort and rationing and all of these other issues that Robert Higgs gets into in his works. So I think that to use the Marshall Plan as a success is to sort of buy into the high school civics class, history class level of critical thinking. Now, they were saying that model doesn't work today, which is true, right? But it also didn't work back then, is my point.
Yeah, well, anytime you're doing central planning, you're misallocating resources that the free market would otherwise put them to more efficient use. So, yeah, I mean, just theoretically, it wouldn't work. Theoretically, you're right. I don't necessarily need to see a bunch of data.
Yeah, it's not even something that needs to be really empirical, though I'm sure that there is certainly empirical evidence. However, as we get into with statistics and the whole mode of economic analysis based on empirical evidence, you can sort of frame it in however terms you want to achieve the results you desire. Yeah,
that's why I hate getting into arguments about facts. I mean, like Larkin Rose talks about, facts are an easy way for an agitated mind to retreat into. And we can argue about facts all day long and never get anywhere. So let's talk principles, let's talk consistency, and I think we'll get far better places. Let's talk a little bit about the subsidies and the rice issue. Now, clearly, this is a misallocation. Taxes are being stolen from people and then given to the winners that the government picks, driving down the cost of rice, meaning, the movie makes the claim that they're like able to produce more with this extra money, and then they can dump it on the third world really cheaply because the cost of rice is so cheap to make, and then you also don't get a whole lot of money for it. But they only make the claim that it's only due to subsidies. And I think that that leaves out the idea of the mechanization and improvements in technology and the bioengineering that allow for large yields.
Yeah, I think that the subsidies in the United States regarding agricultural products is a misallocation that tends to over-mechanize and create an oversupply. So not only is it subsidized, but it's also mechanized, so it's even cheaper and thus harder for the other countries to compete with them.
Right.
Now
Hi, this is Walter Block.
Hey,
Walter.
Hey, we made it. They said we couldn't, but they were wrong.
We're doing it.
Yeah, we've been going for about a half an hour, making reference to your article along the way, but we can sort of do a reboot and just start wherever you'd like to start talking, Walter.
Whatever you say, I'm in your hands.
All right. Well, this is our Thanksgiving episode, so this will come out the 22nd, so just the day before Thanksgiving. And
okay.
We felt like, it's the spirit of charitable giving and be good to your fellow man, so why not talk about Poverty Inc. and your article, which, as we've been discussing already, it creates a lot of division, I think, among a wide spectrum of people.
Are we taping now?
We are, yes. We are recording presently.
Great. Good.
Yeah, so, off to a running start here. But one of the points I was wanting to make was that people on the left and people on the right tend to view this film in a positive light. This was discussed in a Tom Woods episode, I think 641 maybe. I'll put that in the show notes page. But also it divides libertarian types and free market types. Robert and I were, before viewing the film, leaning in the direction that we have since discovered was your position, based on your article with Nathan. But in viewing the film, it's also somewhat compelling in its rhetoric, and I think it does point to a lot of problems that may exist in the ex post fact. versus the ex ante sense, as I think you're very careful to couch your article in the terms of in the very narrow economic scope of the ex ante.
Right, yes, that's a good summary.
So Robert and I have a series of notes. We've already read the Google description, which is very, very short. It just says, filmmaker Michael Matheson Miller investigates the complex global industry of foreign aid. And that's the whole thing. So it doesn't really say much. But I don't know, Robert, do you want to sort of kick us off here?
Yeah, I don't know where to start. I want to ask Dr. Block if your paper was very critical of the film, but do you think that there's any positives to be gleaned from it, or do you think it should be held to a higher standard based on who made it?
Well, I think there are positives. I mean, it's very well done in terms of, I don't know, articulation and music and stuff like that, in terms of the way a filmographer or a photographer would look at it. I'm sure it's a very professionally well done thing, but I think it's an evil film because it attacks the free enterprise system. And I'm a fan of the free enterprise system, and I don't much like attacking it. And people are free to attack it, of course, and when they do, I want to defend the free market system. See, the way I see it, there are really three aspects of the economy. One is government, which is pure evil because they use violence and coercion. And the other two are the commercial market, where I sell you a sweater or you sell me some corn, which is perfectly legitimate. And the third one is the charitable sector, and I regard that as, a lot of people think that it's the charitable sector plus government is on the one side and commerce is on the other side. Oh, no. I don't see it that way at all. I see government on one side, the evil side, and then the good side is commercial endeavors for profit and charity. And I'm a libertarian and I'm an economist, and I look at this film from both viewpoints. And as a libertarian, I always ask, well, does what they're opposing constitute an invasion, a violent invasion, a trespass, an uninvited border crossing, in which case the people who do this should be considered criminals and thrown in jail? And obviously that's crazy. I mean, these are church groups that will give people in, some undeveloped country, not developing country, underdeveloped country, they'll give them eggs or chickens or God knows what. And should that be a crime? Well, no, it shouldn't be a crime. When I first heard the expression dumping, D-U-M-P-I-N-G, I thought it was, like the Japanese were accused of dumping cars, and I figured that what they would do is they'd take a plane and they'd drop a Toyota at around 30,000 feet, and it would hit somebody. And, well, I'm against that kind of dumping, but if they want to, give us a free Volkswagen or a Toyota or something, and we accept, well, that's not an invasion. So from a libertarian point of view, that's not a crime, and it shouldn't be stopped. Now, I don't know that Poverty Inc. says that these people should be considered criminals. I don't think it does. But still, in order to be inclusive, I want to make it clear that church groups that give chickens or eggs or milk or cows or whatever it is to people in undeveloped countries are not criminals. Okay, so that's it for the libertarian perspective. Now let's look at it from an economic perspective. Look, suppose I give you, Dan, a sweater, and you accept it. I am now entitled to say that economic welfare has been increased because I value your possession of the sweater more than mine, and you value your possession of the sweater more than mine. So I give you the sweater, and you're a happy camper, at least ex ante. Now, ex post, it might be that God knows what will happen. Your girlfriend will leave you because she doesn't like the color of the sweater. Who knows? Okay, so possibly that can happen, but that's true in any purchase. Look, suppose you bought the sweater. Ex ante, we can conclude that you value the sweater more than the $20 it cost you, and the sweater owner, the seller, valued the $20 you gave him more than the sweater he gave you. So ex ante, there was an increase in human welfare. Ex ante. But ex post, again, your girlfriend is leaving you because of the stupid sweater, and ex post, it didn't work out. So yes, in the charitable sector, every once in a while it doesn't work out. And in the commercial sector, every once in a while it doesn't work out ex post. Usually it does work out ex post as well as ex ante. It's very rare. Like sometimes you get a lemon car, it really doesn't work that well, and you really regret ex post that you bought it. But usually, you buy a new car or even a used car, they'll give you some sort of warranty. And, most trades and most charitable givings and receivings are not only ex ante beneficial in the sense of anticipations, but also ex post. People benefit from it. Okay, so now this stupid film, Poverty Inc., says, well, what they're going to do is they're going to give poor people a bunch of chickens, and then they'll stop. And what's going to happen is that the domestic chicken farmers are going to go broke because everyone's getting free chickens. Well, the answer to that is they'll anticipate this. What they'll do is they will, increase, I don't know, is herd the right word for chickens? I think it's the right word, flock. I guess flock for chickens and herd for cows. What they'll do is instead of selling eggs while the church group is giving out eggs for free, what they'll do is they'll start making more chickens. Namely, they'll let the eggs hatch, and then when the church group stops, well, then they'll sell eggs again. So if they anticipate this, and it's true, it's difficult to anticipate, but that's what entrepreneurs do. They anticipate things. So even ex post, I think this is not so bad, and yet the film is sort of against this, and I don't think it's justified either on a libertarian ground or on an economic ground to oppose that. Look, the people want those eggs. Let me start in again. I have an aphorism that the market benefits all participants. And not only does the market, well, the market promotes the welfare of all participants. Well, what about the blacksmith when Henry Ford came in with cars? He lost his job. Well, he wasn't benefited, right? But the point is the market benefits all participants. He's no longer a participant because nobody wants the blacksmith services, or very few people do after we have a car. Well, it's the same thing with this. The charity benefits all participants, and the participants are not the egg farmers. They're no longer participants when they're giving out eggs for free, but the people who eat the eggs and the people who give the eggs, those are the only participants. So not only does the market benefit all participants, so does charitable giving, which is part of the free enterprise system as well.
Well, one of the main things that I gleaned from the movie was that charity doesn't incentivize someone to create wealth themselves, and that there's never been a country that has ever become wealthy through aid. What would you say to that, Dr. Block?
Well, say that again.
Well, that charity doesn't incentivize someone to produce a thing themselves or to produce wealth themselves. Like if you're having all your needs met, then you don't have an incentive to go out and create and produce and create value to buy all that stuff yourself. Your labor is freed up to do other things that you may prefer. You may have more leisure time, and you may feel wealthier as a result. But I think the movie was making the claim that Africa is poor because they don't have the international trade that creates wealth.
No, Africa is poor because there are a bunch of commies there. They don't respect private property. If this egg producer started selling eggs at a high price after the church stopped doing it to compensate them for temporary not being able to sell any eggs, they'd put them in jail. The reason that they're poor has got nothing to do with a recipient. Look, there are countries that got rich based on reparations or payments. Israel is one. Germany is one. The Marshall Plan. Peter Bauer talks about that the Marshall Plan helped a lot of the devastated, war-torn countries right after World War II. Look, suppose I offered you, $10,000 a year for the rest of your life. Are you going to accept it, by the way?
I might not. It might create me a lazier person.
Well, some people are like that. Who can deny that? On the other hand, it would free you up to do a lot of things you can't do now. You might be able to quit your lousy job if you have a lousy job. Well, not $10,000 a year, but if I offered you $100,000 a year, you would be able to tell your boss to shove his job, and possibly all you would do is put your feet up on the couch and watch TV for the rest of your life. Or possibly you would do wonderful things. You'd now be free to promote liberty, which I suspect is what you would do. So it all depends. Now, some people don't use money well. Other people do use money well. I don't know. There are countries, as I say, that had vast reparations. Israel from Germany and France and other countries from the U.S., and they did fine with the money. I think that money helped them. So, again, once you're out in the world of ex post, you can't make a definitive claim that every trade benefits eventually. Because, it might make some people lazy, but these are very poor people, and, that they get eggs for free or grain or whatever it is, milk for free is, I think, pretty good.
Yeah, they're materially better off. Like in the Tom Shoes example, they now have gained shoes, and so they can devote whatever other scarce resources they have to their next most desired thing, right, on their value scale.
Right, yeah.
But regarding
now, but I mean, it's true. We can look. If I give you this $100,000 a year, and instead of working at a good job as you now are, you watch TV for the rest of your life and get fat, eating chocolate or something. I haven't really done you a favor. And, Bill Gates and other very rich people, they don't give their kids enough money to live without working. They'll give them enough money to, go to school or to, maybe start a business or something like that. And I think that's not unreasonable for some kids. Other kids, you give them the money and they'll use it for very good purposes. So you can't make a praxeological, apodictic statement that it always will have good effects ex post. Ex ante, you most certainly can, because in their view, a life watching TV and eating chocolate is a well-lived life. And from an Austrian point of view, it's a little difficult to say, well, no, it's not. I mean, from a parental view, I wouldn't want my kids to do that. And I think most parents would share my view. But from the kids' point of view, this is hunky-dory. That's all they want to do is watch TV and get fat.
All right. So, Walter, if I'm going to take you up on this offer, I'd also add that you throw in a COLA as a kicker, a cost of living adjustment, because, as you know, inflation is going to eat away over time at that $100,000 and what it can purchase.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's true, certainly. I could have said giving you $100,000 a year in real terms, which would abstract from any inflation. I mean, the way inflation is going, pretty soon $100,000 isn't going to be that much.
Right, we're all going to be millionaires.
Right, zillionaires, billionaires, whatever.
So it sounds like you're saying that any effects of the welfare trap or enabling would be ex post. And so one of the quotes I like from one of the kids' movies that my girls like is Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July, and there's King Winterbolt, and he says, "I could be greater than Santa. I'd give the little brats twice as many toys, and they would love me more. They'd become lazy and dependent on me, and I would rule them all." And that just makes me think of how the state apparatus is playing a role in not only the welfare aspect, but also in this charitable giving and foreign aid as a means to exert additional control and, I guess, appease the tax cows. Well, not even tax cows, because I guess these people would be on the receiving end of these things. But the argument about the immigration is going to bring people in who are going to then vote for additional handouts. That whole thing.
Well, I think you're making a very good point, an excellent point to distinguish government welfare from private welfare. I think that's a crucial, important distinction to make. Charles Murray wrote an excellent book, Losing Ground. I think the system from the 50s to the 80s. I forget the rest of the subtitle. But he makes a very good point that this sort of welfare has really undermined the black family and now even the white family. You got 3/4 of black kids that are brought up with not an intact family, and he traces it to welfare because welfare gave more money than to a pregnant black girl and now a white girl. It's the same thing in In Sweden, they're having a similar problem, and it's not a black-white thing. It's mostly white people in Sweden. But the government gave black girls who were pregnant a better financial offer than the father of their child could give, on the condition that the father not be in the home. And the black family is broken up as a result of this. And certainly Peter Bauer has done heroic work on foreign aid, which he says is a pejorative. He wants to call it government-to-government transfers of income. Foreign aid implies that it aids anyone. I mean, when I talk about giving and support giving, I'm talking about private giving, not governmental giving. What Peter Bauer has is this 3 M's, M as in Mary, and he has the 3 M's of foreign aid, and it's, what is it, Mercedes, machine guns, and monuments. Namely, when the government, the U.S. or any other government, gives money to some underdeveloped country's government, one thing that they do is they have a monument. And a monument could be a statue to the dictator, but it could be a steel mill that produces steel at 5 times the international price. So what they're really doing is losing out by having a steel mill as a monument, or an air force, or not an air force, but a commercial airline. So that's monuments. Mercedes is what the dictator drives around in, and we all know what the machine guns are for. That's to keep the people down. So Peter Bauer makes a very, very excellent critique of government transfers of income or welfare, and Charles Murray does a very good job on domestic welfare. So I don't want to conflate what's going on with government and what Poverty Inc. is attacking. What Poverty Inc. is attacking is what do you call it? Private charity. And also, while I'm piling on, in football you're not supposed to pile on, but I think I can be excused for that. They've also got this buy local crap, which is an attack on international trade. Somehow the local economy is better if they buy from somebody within 10 miles rather than 1,000 or 10,000 miles away. Well, this is just economic imbecility. And you see, it wouldn't bother me, Poverty Inc., if only the lefties pushed it and the lefties said, oh, this is great. But too many people who should know better, libertarians, have been supporting this. And even some of my students have been, and I've been trying to drum it out of them, but
yeah, we've seen some of the emails back and forth.
Yes. So I'm trying to educate my students to the one true faith here, namely good economics, and I'm having trouble. And these are some of my best students, not my worst students. So it's a difficulty. But so I'm really highly critical of this Poverty Inc. movie, and I think it's made up by a bunch of pinkos, and it's somehow brought in libertarians who should know better. I mean, libertarians are supposed to be good on economics, and these people are, a disgrace. I don't mean my students are a disgrace. They're just students, but there are adults who are, supporting this movie, and I don't know, libertarian organizations that support this movie, and I think that's a disgrace.
Well, I mean, to be fair, there are some nods to
fair crap. I don't want to be. No, I'm kidding.
But
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, there are some nods to a lack of property rights and a equality under the law kind of aspect to this that is to set the stage for entrepreneurial efforts and to be able to organically grow their economy in those areas. And I think that does speak a little bit to free enterprise. It's basically saying that the local governments there are in the way. All the red tape and regulations.
I agree with you. There's another book by Hernando de Soto, a Peruvian guy. I forget the title of his book. He's very good on the fact that these underdeveloped countries don't respect private property rights. So if we're asking why is South America and Asia in dire straits economically speaking, there are many reasons, and all of them have to do with government and lack of private property and lack of allowing people to make a profit, and if you raise prices, they'll come get you. So there's a lot of explanation as to why these countries are poor, but one of my books is this thing where we compare. I did this with Gwatney and Lawson, where we compared about 100 different countries, and we looked at the economic freedom of the countries, namely, how big is the government, and how long does it take to set up a legal business, and how about tariffs and regulations and things like that. And you'll never guess what we found. We found very, very strong correlations, not only between economic freedom and wealth, per capita, but even between economic freedom and growth in per capita income and wealth. So yes, Adam Smith said it very well. The wealth of nations. Why is it that some nations are wealthy and other nations are not? And the answer is pretty much because some nations have free enterprise and others don't. And this Poverty Inc. is heading us in the wrong direction. It's heading us against free enterprise. So I think men of goodwill should stomp on it.
Daniel, are you having your mind changed? I'm curious. What's going on here?
Well, before Walter came on, I was making the argument that in reading the paper, it seemed as if it was saying that I may disagree with Murray Rothbard on a handful of things and therefore no longer listen to anything that Murray Rothbard ever said, the baby with the bathwater thing. I do think there are some positive things in this film, and they do point to some problems. I mean, there is heavy-handed government involvement, not only in restricting the free market in those local economies, but also in the A side of the equation, in the United States. Like, the whole apparatus seems to be, the infrastructure around the donations and the giving seems to be glommed onto the UN and the State Department and government and state-sanctioned activities. And I would think that it's still true in the ex-ante sense that the recipients are benefiting, but so is the bureaucratic morass, that bureaucratic structure where they're living high on the hog in these foreign countries. Like Theodore Dalrymple, in his portion of the interview, said that they lived in palatial accommodations with servants, air-conditioned Toyota Land Cruisers, tax-free income. All of this is basically they're cut off the top of all of the donated money or the involuntarily donated money, like the tax sourced money that was being used in these areas. And so I think it's correct to criticize that portion of the equation, the state apparatus, the bureaucratic nature that's on top of it. I do see that the individual and purely donation, purely charity things were unduly criticized in the ex-ante sense in this film.
Well, I agree with you entirely to the extent that the film criticizes government. Look, I'm second to no one in my criticism of government. I agree with you there. The hassle I got into with my students and other people is not over whether we think government is good. All my students think government is bad. There's no question about that. Yes, okay, maybe I'm being too harsh. There are parts of the film that criticizes government. But, the Acton Institute, which is supposed to be a free market enterprise, supported this movie. I mean, have these people lost their minds? I mean, look, I disagree with Murray Rothbard on 1/10 of 100th of 1% of everything in political economy, but I revere Murray Rothbard, and I think the Acton Institute is very good. Bob Sirico is an excellent economist, but I think he really goofed on this one, given that they supported this movie.
Well, aren't they just basically making the claim that there are downstream effects that can be negative? So they're not just looking at the ex-ante sense, and they're not saying that these people who are giving these contributions should be put in jail. They're not saying it's a violation of anyone, it's not a fraud, it's not force. They're saying that there just might be some negative effects downstream.
Well, yeah, that's true, and I don't disagree with that, but the point is that the same can be said about the free enterprise system. Look, we free enterprises believe that we should legalize heroin, right?
Yep.
I take that as like a given. If you don't believe that, you're not really a libertarian. Do we think that heroin is a good thing? No. I wouldn't want my kids to use heroin. I think heroin is something to be avoided. But from a free enterprise point of view, we want to legalize heroin, and we want to show that the effects of prohibiting heroin are very deleterious. Okay, so they're making a point that sometimes these things can go astray, but it's the same. But see, they would never make a film saying that the free enterprise system can do this. They tick on charity, and yet, in my view, charity and the commercial part of the economy are both part of economic freedom. So
right, but aren't they saying that perhaps it's just a thing worthy of examining and perhaps doing in a better way that maybe mitigates some of these negative downstream effects? So they're not saying, don't do it, but they're saying let's rethink this a little bit. And isn't that a market mechanism?
Well, look, it's free speech. I'm not saying they're criminal or anything like that. And if their message is to churches, hey, churches, be a little less volatile in your giving. If you want to give eggs, instead of giving a lot of eggs every third month and sort of screwing up the domestic egg, okay, fine. But, that's not what they're doing. They're really trying to undermine the thing at its roots. I mean, if they were just advising churches to or charitable organizations to not be so volatile in their giving, okay, I have no problem with that. But the way that the film comes across to me is, this is an evil, not a legal evil. We're not going to put them in jail, but this is an evil, and they're screwing up the local economy. And they pay no attention to the fact that the competitors, the egg manufacturers, or they have some sort of, carpenters, or I forget other people there, when they give it out for free. Well, these people could just stock up, and then when the giving stops, then come back into the market and charge high prices. But the film never says that if you charge high prices, the authority is going to come get you. They're going to accuse you of what's the word I'm looking for? Gouging. They're going to accuse you of profiteering and gouging. Now, if they had said that, then I'd be a fan of this movie. But they don't say that. They just say that the churches are screwing up the economy. And they don't realize that the free enterprise system, of which charitable giving is part, can deal with this sort of a thing. That's not the enemy. The enemy is government. And very peripherally, en passant, they attack government, but their main focus, their main target is private enterprise, these churches. And, I don't like a movie that makes as its main target the private enterprise. Let the main enemy be the government. The government is the main enemy of progress, not the well-meaning but unsophisticated charitable givers.
Yeah, I think different people seeing this movie are going to perceive different things out of it, because I felt like they were critical of the government infrastructure being the centerpiece of the apparatus that these private donations would sort of be funneled into. And I also didn't see them saying, don't do charitable giving, but maybe rethink the methods and what the potential effects might be. They said that, like, their example was that the Marshall Plan was an outdated model that, in their view, worked well at the time, but then was no longer working in today's world. And you seem to have a similar opinion based on Peter Bauer, though I've always understood, beyond the high school level of understanding the Marshall Plan, like even the Mises Institute, there's an article by Jeffrey Tucker from 1997 where he's very critical of the Marshall Plan. And I think that many other of the libertarian-type Austrian economist types would criticize the Marshall Plan as not actually being the impetus behind recovery in Europe, but it was actually in the way of recovery, and the money was, based on theft, right, of the American taxpayers.
Oh, yeah. Look, I'm not defending the Marshall Plan. I'm just saying, there's this joke. The Economist was asked, how is your wife? And the answer was, compared to what? I mean, look, whenever it's government-to-government transfers of income, that's very bad. But what these churches are doing is private-to-private. And the movie is likening that to government-to-government. Look, it's very bad when the government gives Marshall Plan money to government in Europe, because it's theft from the people in the United States, and the government in the recipient country uses the money to aggrandize itself. But what's happening in Poverty, Inc. is only peripherally is government involved, and to that extent that the movie attacks the government, I'm all for it. Look, the government, the movie is not 100% bad. There are some good things, but the main focus, the reason that this sticks in my craw, the reason that this movie stands head and shoulders over many other movies in the libertarian community, is because they're not attacking only government, they're attacking private enterprise too. And when you attack private enterprise, all supporters of private enterprise should object to it. And here we find the Acton Institute supporting this, which I find highly problematic.
Okay, well, and to point out your, the Marshall Plan government-to-government transfer, I like this Ron Paul quote that foreign aid is money from poor people in rich countries to rich people in poor countries. And of course,
excellent point. Let me mention one other thing, and I do mention this in our paper that I co-authored with Nathan Fryzek, and that's the whole thing of, Standard Oil. Why did Standard Oil become a monopoly, so-called? I don't think it was a monopoly. I think monopoly should be reserved for government grants of privilege. The argument was... there's this guy, I think John McGee in the 1960 Journal of Law and Economics really blows a hole in this. The argument was that what Standard Oil would do is Standard Oil was all over the place, all over the country, and it would attack, some oil refiner, say in Louisiana. How would it attack it? It would sell oil for a much lower price than the prevailing price, and it would lose money, but where would it get the money with which to finance the loss? From every other Standard Oil company. And then the Louisiana local refiner would go broke, and now they would triple their prices and now start attacking somebody in Ohio with money from every other Standard Oil plus Louisiana, which was now tripling or quadrupling the price. And John McGee showed that this was nonsense. What he said is, look, when Standard Oil is selling oil refining in Louisiana, he's not going to bankrupt the Louisiana oil refiners. What the Louisiana oil refiners are going to do is send out a message to their customers saying, hey, look, everybody buys Standard Oil because they're selling it way below the cost of producing it, and we're going to buy some too, and we're going to not shut down, but we're going to have a skeleton crew, and as soon as they get tired of losing money, we'll go back into business. Namely, this idea couldn't work, and McGee shows that the reason that Rockefeller did so well is he had technology that was a better way of refining oil than the competitors. But this is the same economic model that the Acton Institute through Poverty Inc. is attacking, and it's fallacious. These people ought to read the McGee article, which is an excellent article that undermines the fallacious economics of the Standard Oil analysis, and yet Poverty Inc. is doing the same thing. Now, look, I don't say that the movie is 100% bad. To the extent they attack government, and I think it was only peripherally that they attack government, they're good. But it was only peripheral. The main focus of this was to attack private enterprise. And if a lefty group, if Bernie Sanders and Corp did this, well, no libertarians would be fooled. But since the Acton Institute and other free market people support this, people are fooled who shouldn't be fooled, who should know better.
And do you think, Dr. Block, do you think this is intentional on the part of the Acton Institute, or do you think this is just them dropping the ball?
Oh, no, I don't think it's intentional. I think these are good people. I mean, their hearts are pure. I know Bob Sirico for years, and Markets and Morality is a very good institution, a very good periodical. No, I can't believe that they're purposely trying to undermine. I don't think they've gone commie. I think this is an era of judgment, not an era of morality. Oh, God forbid that they would do that. No.
So perhaps they just forgot where Hazlitt or Bastiat may apply to the scenario at play here?
Yes, that would be precisely my analysis of it. They just dropped the ball. It was inadvertent. They should take better economics courses. They should read Murray Rothbard and Henry Hazlitt and Bastiat a little bit more. So I can't believe that this was a purposeful attempt to undermine what they stand for, and what they stand for is pretty much free enterprise. No, I think that this is just a mistake. It's a common mistake to think that somehow the charitable sector is not part of the free enterprise system. It is. So I think it's a mistake. What do they call it in Catholic theology? A mortal sin and a venal sin. I think it's a venal sin, not a mortal sin.
All right. So you're loosening up. Walter Moderate Block is kind of coming out now.
I love it.
No, I think this is good. We had recently done another sort of documentary movie, and it was The Inequality for All by Robert Reich. That was our episode 49.
Oh, and he's an evil man.
Yeah, that one was
horrible.
Terrible. We ripped that one apart for about 90 minutes.
And then there was Nickeled and Dimed by some woman, socialist. I forget who she was. There are a lot of lefty things. Robert Reich is pure evil, and this Nickeled and Dimed lady is very bad. I think that the Poverty Inc. is not in that category. It's just a mistake. Well-intentioned, but mistaken.
All right. Well, it sounds like Dr. Block is on the black and gold or black and red on the terms of the spectrum of our analysis here.
I'm
And
sorry, I don't catch that black and red. What's that?
We've got a rating system on the show. We either go black and gold for good, and you recommend this movie to be seen, or black and red, you do not recommend this movie. Do you recommend this movie to be seen by anybody?
Well, no, I think everyone should see it. I don't think people shouldn't see it, but people should see it with a jaundiced eye. They should read the article that I wrote with Nathan Fryzek and then watch it. And I think it would be an edifying experience. So I think people should watch it. I just think it's mistaken. But look, we read Keynes, we read Marx, we read Robert Reich, right? So we should be aware of what I won't say the enemy is saying, but we should be aware of fallacious economics as well as good economics.
Yeah, I like your recommendation to read your paper before watching the movie, because I did it the other way around, and I had previously held the position that your paper had, but then when I watched the movie, I found it rather compelling in some of its rhetoric, and then in reading your paper, I was brought back to reality for the most part.
Okay, read the paper before and after. I mean, they say, what is it, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a moving picture is probably worth 100,000 words. So a moving picture's got music, it's got people, it's more interesting than just reading an article, even though I pat myself on the back. Nathan and I wrote a very good article. It's interesting, it's well written, but it can't compete with a movie. So I would say read the paper first, then see the movie, and then read the paper again.
Yeah, sounds like good advice.
Yeah, so we'll put a link to that in the show notes page, and this show notes page will be actualanarchy.com/51.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on your show. It was a pleasure to mouth off about this movie, and I'd be happy to come on your show any other time.
All right. Yeah, that sounds great. And Robert and I may just continue rambling on for a little bit and close out the show, but you're free to hang out or drop off, whatever you'd like.
Well, I'm working on defending the Undefendable 3, and I'm going to get back to that, but I'll wish you guys the best of luck in your show.
Okay. I hope you find room for the zombie article.
Right. Zombies aren't all bad.
All right.
Voluntary zombies, anyway.
Yeah, all right. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us, Walter, and we'd love to have you back sometime in the near future.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Dr. Block, everybody. All right.
All right. Well, I think that was pretty good. I think he came out of the gates pretty heavy against the movie, and then sort of moderated a little bit as we pointed out a few positives for him.
Yeah, I mean, he makes a few concessions in the paper about the ex post and the long-term effects and that sort of thing. But yeah, I would say the paper is highly critical, much in the same way that what he was just saying. Although he does recommend people see it, like we did. Read it, watch it, discuss it.
Yeah, and I think there's a good point to be made that maybe it is something worth considering and thinking about. And in reading his paper before watching the movie, then you're sort of inoculated against the economic problems that are present in the film. But I still think it asks good questions. And because you and I are already critical of government, I think we saw it with a more jaundiced eye of, well, the government is sort of the primary mover here in allocating where these funds go and in preventing the people in the third world countries from being able to lift themselves up because of all the restrictions and the lack of recognition of property rights and the legal structure and all the rest. And so because we are already sort of from that viewpoint, I feel like we saw this movie in a bit more differently than your average viewer might, and also differently than Walter did, because I think he's so much more advanced than us in the economic things that all he saw were the problems.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One thing we didn't mention is that the movie starts and ends with the We Are the World type, There Will Be Christmas, No Christmas in Africa, and all the celebrity stuff. What was your reaction to that? Because, yeah, mine was fairly negative. I mean, they seem to have their hearts in the right place, and they want to help and that sort of thing. But the people in the film are highly critical of the celebrity perspective.
Yeah, I think they probably were focusing on the emotion, like feeling patronized to,
right, or
talked down to, or about, as if they are helpless and need the help. When I go back to, I think it's the government's there preventing them from being more autonomous,
right,
and being able to lift themselves up. Because like most of the problems that I think are there, like the famine that was in Ethiopia, I believe that, and fact check me on this, but I believe it was a result of some central planning type failure. by the government.
I won't fact check you, but I'm sure our listeners could, because it sounds right. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's the famous Holodomor, which is the Russian famine of, I believe, like the 1920s or the 1930s or whatever. I think it's the 20s.
Yeah, that was Ukraine, right?
Yeah, the Ukraine, where the Russian government prevented, just basically took all their food, left them with very little. I mean, it was so horrific to the point where people were selling human body parts to try and survive.
Right, and there was a recent movie about that, Bitter Harvest, I think.
Yep.
And that might be one that we should watch and potentially do a show on. And speaking of that event, Tom Woods just reposted an episode of his. It's his tomwoods.com/399. So it's 600 episodes back, but it was about the Russian Revolution, because that recently had the 100-year anniversary. And he goes into the Lenin takeover and the resulting economic chaos, and including the starvations and all of that. So I think that's an interesting thing to also look at, and almost purely a government problem.
And this show's going to have a lot of show notes. It's going to be a little library down underneath. It'll be good.
I know. I'm going to have to re-listen to this and make notes of all the things I said. I'm going to post in the show notes page. But let's see. Where else do you want to take us, Robert?
Well, one thing that Dr. Block kept saying, and that I didn't really get when I watched the movie, was he said that the movie demonized international trade and romanticized buying local and that sort of thing. And I can only assume that he meant by that when they talked to the Haitian solar power people. They were selling locally in Port-au-Prince, and maybe the local rice farmers, they should buy from the local rice farmers, that sort of thing. I didn't really get that so much. I just thought that the movie said, well, these local rice farmers can't compete with the free rice that's coming in, so therefore they're going to go out of business. I thought that was more of this is what's going to happen, not necessarily saying that, well, people should go ahead and pay the higher prices just to keep their local farmers in business. I don't think the movie said that at all.
Well, I think towards the end, in the talking head interview portion with the lady who was talking about Bono and how he had sort of a mixed message in the same speech, where he's like, free market enterprise is the way to get people out of poverty, but we also need more aid, and she was confused by that message. I think her portion was, but we also need to develop local economies and buy local and have protectionism and eschew the international trade. When Walter Block is correct, there is benefits to trade. The consumers in the receiving country are getting more goods, higher quality goods at lower prices.
I don't remember her saying that. If she said that, if she said buy locally and you have protectionism, then yeah, absolutely no. That's absolutely wrong. Yeah, I don't remember that part, but that very well could be in there.
Pretty sure it was in there. But overall, I think Walter's got some pretty good criticisms, and he does hold this to a higher standard because of the origin. I find it interesting that Tom Woods was positive as he was about the film, but he was also interviewing the director, writer, producer guy. So
right.
It's sort of hard to shit on the guy's stuff right in front of him.
Right. You're not having a debate about the merits of the movie. You're kind of just talking about him and whatever.
Right, which is one of the reasons I like the format of our show, because we're talking about something else, so it's a little bit easier to kind of be a touch more critical.
Yeah, we're not always talking about how I'm a terrible person. That's
right.
Good. I appreciate that. Well, let's see. I don't really have any more notes. I think we pretty much covered it before Dr. Block came on, and then Dr. Block smashed it. And then, I don't think it's a perfect movie. Like I said, I think it's got its issues. And maybe I think Dr. Block is more right in that, when the movie does kind of conflate, it shows the, the volatility of the market. Therefore, these entrepreneurs are having trouble dealing with it. Well, I would say, on the one hand, tough titty. On the other hand, I have sympathy for the entrepreneur in the world, especially when they're having to deal with all the government regulations and all this other stuff. So, a lot of issues, but in the end, I don't necessarily say it's a work of pure evil, like Dr. Block says.
All right, so you're probably going to go a little black and gold on this sucker?
Yeah, I'm going to go black and gold. I think it does drop the ball. I think there are mistakes and fallacies, and it should be seen with a critical eye. and it should be. I think Dr. Block's article should be read before and after. I did with you. I just watched the movie and then I read the article. And like we had talked with Drake in the past, we were more on the side of the article beforehand, and then watching the movie, found it fairly compelling. And then the article, I don't think the article's perfect either. And I think he makes some concessions in the article, like the whole argument of just dumping aid on people doesn't create the most incentivized, productive person, much like a parent. Like, I mean, he said that. Dr. Block said that. He's like, I would treat someone in the market differently than I would treat my child, and I think that's a fair statement to make. Just because something supposedly benefits somebody in the beginning, like you wouldn't necessarily want that for somebody in the long term.
Right, and he is careful to couch his argument within the paper to just the particular economic component and the ex ante aspect of it. So the negative effects downstream, which are potential, but they could also be in any market transaction, which charity would be. There's no guarantees, of course. So, I think that knowing that the paper is confined to that one small area makes the paper correct, if not, I think, a bit of a harsh stretch to then throw the baby out with the bathwater, like we were saying, because he did come out of the gates super critical of the entire movie being evil, but then did walk it back a little bit with us because there was on the periphery some anti-government sentiment to it. Yes,
right. And I agree that it should have been more along the lines of the anti-government stuff. I think towards the end of the movie where they're talking about the property rights and the horrific path to being a fully regular or a fully licensed company, those kind of things are really strong. And it's not as strong when it's kind of playing on your emotions to have a entrepreneur talk about his hardships. That is a bit unfair because you can't conflate this one hardships by this one entrepreneur with doing everybody ill. That's a fallacy for sure.
Right, and that's one of the things that these documentaries like to do is pick out a few case study sub-stories to hit their points on the emotional notes. We saw that with Inequality for All, with the Costco couple and a few other examples, and they do a similar thing here. The one other sort of anti-government sentiment towards the end, which I really liked, and I want to make sure we mention it, is the one guy was talking about the types of generations in Africa, maybe in a particular country, but potentially in Africa in general, where he was talking about the cheetah generation versus the hippo generation.
Right, the hippos, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the hippos were the ones who are sort of the entrenched interests who are glomming onto the political power, the political apparatus to protect themselves, cartelize, monopolize, etc., maintain their established position, versus the cheetah generation, which he basically said was they're not going to wait for the governments to grant them privilege or grant them things. They're going to go out and do it themselves. And I felt that was a good message.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also like that they talked about the difficulty in securing a loan. I thought that was nice because they didn't have the landed titles, and so they couldn't have collateral on a loan. That's a issue, but those are libertarian free market issues, right? I mean, we're talking about a society based on private property rights, and I think this movie, although it got some broken window fallacies and some candlemaker fallacies wrong, at its heart, I think it was more of talking about private property rights as being the solution. So
right, and
I give it a tentative black and gold.
All right, and I'll agree with you for the most part that at its heart, the core issue really is the government is the problem. Though I think that they don't devote nearly as much attention to it, and they do have the economic fallacies like we were just talking about. So I'm going to tentatively also give it a black and gold / black and gray. I think that this is one of those where you get a prescription and you need to take it with food. I think that is the case here. You need to watch this movie after having read Block's article, Walter Block and Nathan Fryzek, I think is his name, or Fryzek, and then watch the movie and then read it again. I think that they kind of need to go together so that you can correct for the economic mistakes that are in here and potentially get to the message that you and I got out of it, which is that government is the problem here.
Yeah, government is the problem, but I also want to reiterate, and I've mentioned this a couple times, but that charity is good, but don't be satisfied with just charity being good. I think the movie does make a decent case for maybe there's a better way to help people, and that's just a function of the market. The market is a way to figure out the best way to do something, And maybe just giving people stuff isn't the best way. Maybe international trade is the best way. Maybe something we haven't discovered yet is the best way.
Or a variety of ways.
Or a variety of ways. Maybe charity works better for some people and not others. Maybe a whole ton of aid at one point is really good, but then continual aid later on maybe isn't the greatest thing long down the road. I think there's a variety of activities, and information is good. So ideas should be, examined and rejected or accepted based on their merits. Yeah,
and I think considering that it is a market and that there should be some sort of feedback mechanism in play, that there would be a way to better craft the modes of deploying these, donations or whatever. And I liken it to like a cone type structure, like at the very widest and most removed from the situation, you've got sort of the bureaucratic state-run apparatus, which has very little responsiveness to any feedback mechanisms. They're sort of in it for their own sake. Like if they solve the problem, they're out of a job. They're living high on the hog. They're getting the tax-free. They've got the land cruisers. They've got the servants. Why should they solve the problem they're there to solve if that means that they're going to lose all of that? So they're
right. You've mentioned in the past, if your job depends on you not seeing a problem, then it's going to be really hard for you to see that problem.
Right. And then moving down my theoretical cone structure here, then you get into the NGO types and the organizations, the churches, the sort of do-gooder organizations that do need to see some feedback with what they're doing, right? Like they do need to see that some good is happening, or they're going to change course. Like the example in the movie was they gave eggs for a certain period of time and then they stopped. They moved their donation efforts to another area of the world because they felt that it was more needy or whatever. And then you proceed further down the cone, it's, you and me, the individual. A family situation, or we're sending money to somebody overseas, we're sponsoring a child ourselves, whatever, that's where you get the immediate feedback. Sure, there's the enabling parent who keeps giving their kid money, buying the sob story, that they're going to turn their life around, and then they don't, and they don't, but eventually, sometimes they do. Like my brother's an example of that. He was enabled for a few years, and we'd see him, just around the holidays, and you always have this, I'm getting better kind of story, but I just need a little bit more money, I need a little bit more whatever. Yeah. And it was only after that was cut off that he finally turned it around, and now he's doing very, very well. He's married, got kids, nice house, doing very well financially, economically, occupationally, et cetera, but it was only because he was no longer able to sort of have that pseudo basic income guarantee from my mom.
Right, yeah. If all your needs are met, what incentive do you have to get your shit together? If you're being subsidized, if your current behavior is being subsidized, what incentive do you have to change it?
Right, and you've made the point many times, you subsidize the thing you want more of. So if you want more poverty, you pay people to be poor. Right. And I wish we'd brought that up with Walter, because I think that would be an interesting conversation to have, because it sort of merges the ex ante in a more immediate sense, I think. Like it brings ex post and ex ante almost to the same point. Right, yeah, no, that's a good idea. We should have I had written down in my notes to say that, and I failed to do it, so you can blame me. Oh, that's okay. I think he was still a very very good guest to have on, especially for this movie. And like we've said a couple of times, I do recommend seeing this movie, but take it with food. Take it with the nourishing of knowledge from the paper that Walter and Nathan wrote. For sure. All right, well, I think that's going to do it for our Thanksgiving special here at the Actual Anarchy podcast. Unless, Robert, you have anything else you'd like to add. Black Friday is coming up. People can smash the Amazon search buttons on our website and do their Black Friday and Cyber Monday shopping if they want to support the site. That'd be great. Get any other, like holiday messaging out for the peeps? Hug your family. Give them some love. Live free. Spread the ideas of liberty as delicately as you can, I suppose. Don't get into too many contentious arguments. We get together on the holidays to be with our family and loved ones, to spread joy and happiness. And while I'd like to always take an opportunity to spread the ideas of liberty, also just have a good time. So get out there and bond with people if you can, with your statist relatives. Because you never know when they're going to be gone. I'm sorry. Death is a part of life. Deal with it. All right, that's a good turn at the end there. Happy holidays. We're all going to die. Well, thank you guys very much. Have a very happy Thanksgiving. And if you like the work that we do here, check out our tip jar page at actualanarchy.tipjar or .com/tipjar or our Patreon page. We can get all sorts of goodies like the Rothbard repository, which is a searchable database of Murray Rothbard lectures. We've got the readitfor.me. We've got Liberty Classroom, the Amazon links, of course. And we're going to be doing another show coming up this upcoming Sunday. It'll be episode 52, and I believe it's going to be The Founder, the Ray Kroc McDonald's movie. Sound good to you, Robert?
Yeah, definitely. That should be a good one. Check it out and see it if you haven't seen it.
All right, that's probably one you can see ahead of time. So mark it down now. It'll come out the Sunday after Thanksgiving, and it'll be episode 52. This is episode 51, the Thanksgiving special with Dr. Walter Block on Poverty, Inc., and can be found at actualanarchy.com/51. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, and thank you very much. Good night.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day. Do 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 do.